Welcome, everyone. We are here at Black Hat. It's 2019. I'm so excited. This is our first interview of Black Hat this year, and it's a little different. We're not at the pool area like we were last year, but we've got a lot of great interviews, and I'm excited to introduce Hardik Modi. He's the Senior Director of Threat Intelligence for NETSCOUT. Hardik, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Paul. Good to be here.
Yes, nice to have you here. And we've got a lot of really cool and fun things to talk about. NetScout's done a threat intelligence report.
That's right.
And a lot of people do threat intelligence reports. However, when I read through the notes on it, I was intrigued by several topics. So the first of which was when you looked at the data, I'm assuming you're collecting from your various networks that NetScout owns and maintains, is the basically malware on smartphones. And I think a lot of times we talk about this from a personal perspective, like someone's breaking into my smartphone to get at my data.
Yeah.
But I've always been very concerned about someone getting into a lot of different people's smartphones, not caring what's on the phone, but using it either as a jumping off point or to do a denial of service attack. And you have some evidence that that happened.
We do. And so, yes, our findings are from the first half of this year. So, like, let's say January through late June 2019. And in that period, I can point to two specific examples of, the use of mobile devices in attacks. So, and people tend to forget, like, mobile devices are just another form of IoT. So when we say IoT is a security risk, absolutely mobile devices are right in there. So I'll start with an APT group that we're tracking. So these are actually some guys that we named a few years ago, like the Donut team, that we attribute to be an Indian APT. And absolutely, they've, where they still do their phishing campaigns and they still, run, their weaponized like spreadsheets and other forms of like MS Office documents. We have seen in the first 6 months of the year transition to APK, like Android malware.
Well, because Android packages are really easy to Trojan, right? I mean, I've seen research from years ago where pen testers are like, basically you can just like put extra code inside of an Android package and you're off to the races, right?
And again, the mobile, the app stores are just like, there's just so many. They're not controlled. Like, maybe, a few of them have some kind of bounds around them. But like,
Google's gotten a little better, but it's still, I believe, easy to Trojan an Android package.
So that was the first. And then number two, there's like this thing called a constrained like application protocol. So it's basically this really, really lightweight protocol that was meant to have other security features built on top of it. But as we know, like devices get built and like they need to go to market like as soon as possible.
Right.
And some of them get shipped out with with just the basic protocol. So what
there's an internal communication protocol on the phones, right? That allows apps to talk. It's kind of like IPC was, inter-process communication was before, but it's on the phone, right?
No. So CoAP is more of a network, a full network kind of control protocol, like for these devices. So a whole bunch of devices got shipped with CoAP on them, like completely insecure. And then somebody went ahead and found that it's really easy to do reflection amplification DDoS attacks using these devices.
And is that specific to Android?
So those are. I think the protocol can be deployed independent of the underlying OS, but is the best we know, like
it's mostly Android.
A whole bunch of devices are out there that have those now.
And Android represents still the largest market share globally, right? In the U.S., there's more concentration of, but you mentioned India before. I think outside the U.S., Android is probably more popular.
And
right?
the DDoS attacks that we saw largely involved devices in China.
Yep.
So yes, incredibly popular Android, in the marketplace there, and these devices were being used for DDoS attacks. We saw a whole bunch of attacks. We realized that there was a really, kind of significant amplification factor. So as in, you could send a fairly small packet and get a big one back.
Right.
And
that's a recipe for
yes. But now the good news was that these had fairly dynamic IP addresses. So as soon as the adversary found like, okay, I have a botnet of like 300,000 that I could use to launch the attack.
You're gonna lose.
A week later, a whole bunch of them have shifted. Now,
I'm sure they're gonna work around that problem eventually.
That's coming next. But that's that's like mobile devices, in the security world right now.
Right. You also said in the report that it's little as 5 days from a new attack vector being discovered to weaponization, and we've tracked this in years past as vulnerability versus release of the exploit, right? But in this case, you didn't use the words vulnerability and exploit, right? It's an attack vector they can be weaponized. So this doesn't mean people should patch quicker, because that probably isn't going to help you today as much as it used to.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd still say that for your average, like, if Microsoft does Patch Tuesday, please patch. Like,
Sure.
the
major ones I agree.
Yeah. Now, in this case, again, in the in the DDoS scenario, if you are the target, it's not about whether you patched or didn't patch.
Doesn't
it's
matter.
about everybody else who's being used to attack you. So that's and actually in DDoS, like, weaponization is really interesting because it isn't just like, hey, I'm a smart person and I have decided to use this vulnerability that I saw somebody talk about at a conference. This is actual use of it on like online platforms. So they what we call like the booter stressor services, where I can just go to a website and I can say I want to launch an attack and I'll pay you $5 or Bitcoin, like the equivalent to launch an attack against.
And you give them a target.
Yeah.
And
now you don't really know what they're using. But those guys are innovating all the time. They have all the incentive in the world to innovate.
And that's their business.
That's their business. So they're paying attention to these vulnerabilities that are being announced.
Because they can have a better service.
Yeah, and that gets incorporated into their service and then used like worldwide.
There's a whole bunch of shady
quickly.
stuff that goes on. There's a whole other interview we could do about the shady stuff.
Yeah.
But one of the use cases you pointed out in the report was that students could use this to launch a denial of service attack against a testing site. Because a lot of the testing that happens in colleges, university, I would imagine even high school today, happens online. So if you didn't prepare for the test, but you have $5 to go buy a denial of service attack, you can do that, which is now the equivalent of pulling the fire alarm before the test happens, right?
The modern day equivalent. Yeah, no, so you're right. And so in this case, like, we had a university basically come to us and say, hey guys, fine, we have products, we have all this stuff, but this just keeps happening. And so they signed up for our service, and that's it. Like, they would talk to us about how, yes, when it's time for testing, that's exactly when they would see those attacks. Now,
interesting. So they were actually, this is a practical thing. This isn't just something you observed. You had a customer that was experiencing
we had somebody
this.
who came to us and said, yes, signed up for the service specifically for that reason.
That's awesome.
And again, like, with DDoS, it is. I'll just caveat, lay it out there. There's enough, like, the techniques involved don't always lend themselves towards like solid attribution. You can't always go somebody said,
agree.
Do we know, like, who that person is, who launched these attacks and why specifically? But you can draw inferences from, every time you do a test, if that's exactly when you're going to start getting your DDoS attack, clearly,
also, if it follows that same student around, you know what I mean? You could do some analysis on students who are registered, right? You know what I mean?
That's another podcast right there.
Exactly. It is. That's an interesting investigation, for sure. Yeah. And I think, coaching our students on morals and ethics and values is really there's true fix there.
The right way out.
Some of the other things that we want to talk about were in the IoT space, right? And I made this parallel to when in the early 2000s, if you had a large network, university or otherwise, right, and you were to build a Windows system in 2002, 2003, while you were building it, it was compromised by worms. So we had to create these safe zones inside of our network to actually build the systems because there was so many vulnerabilities that were remotely exploitable. Now, largely in the Windows front, that changed. Linux front, that changed as well. But now with IoT, your report indicates that now we're starting this cycle all over again, that if you put an IoT device on the internet with a default username and password, it's compromised right away.
And Paul, think about it. I mean, is any of us building IoT devices? No.
We're just sticking them on the network.
We're just deploying them. And, so some other, like, this is independent research that we've cited, like, upwards of 7 million IoT devices being deployed every day. That's not sitting in a lab with somebody's kind of updating software before it goes live. It's just going out there. A whole bunch of this stuff sits on a shelf in a store.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, from the time it's built and like OEM'd and somebody puts software on it to where, maybe in Best Buy you walk up and buy yourself, like, the camera, that's we're talking months.
Right.
How many vulnerabilities, would have been discovered even in that time. So even if it was secure when it shipped, secure at deployment isn't a reality. And now there are other ways in which people are mitigating this. True. Yep. However, there's clear, we see this, a lot, that there are plenty of vulnerable IoT devices on the internet, and they're being exploited, in
And
so many different ways.
Many of them don't auto update either.
Many of them don't auto update.
And is that a cost thing now that I think about it? Because if you think about building the infrastructure and the software to support, hey, this thing just auto updates and never has an issue, there's a lot of resources that go into that.
Yeah.
So I think they're shelving that so they can get stuff out faster and cheaper.
I think, you put yourself in their shoes, certainly like, time to market is always a thing.
Right.
That, from the standpoint of the deployment, right? I mean, we see this, how many times do we yell at Microsoft for Patch Tuesday going wrong? Like, if you were to find that, hey, all of your cameras across the whole city just went kaput because, there was a bad software update. Like, so we're not there in terms of confidence in these systems. I do think that that's necessary. It's not like there will be other mitigations that are used, but there's no doubt that you cannot be deploying software and just letting it sit.
And it's tricky on IoT devices too, as you know, because the operating system, file system, applications are all kind of in the same file essentially. If that goes wrong, everything stops. Whereas a Windows or Linux system, you can apply an update to a package or something, you can back it out, the system's still running. In IoT, it just goes away. Like you said, the cameras just go away.
Yeah, I mean, and with desktop computing and servers, what are we talking, 30 years, 40 years of experience doing this?
Right, correct.
So many things that went wrong along the way. But, this is different. And then absolutely, there's just let's say you're in an operating theater, you're having surgery done on yourself, and the machines around you suddenly decide that, oh, it's time to update. Let me let's take a break here. It doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah,
so
it's true. Now, the FTC has imposed fines on certain manufacturers. Specifically, you mentioned D-Link in here, but there have been select others. And that's, a very high, and again, another show in and of itself is that debate between regulation and not regulation in the space of IoT, where if D-Link, for example, puts out something that's vulnerable, they could incur fines from the FTC, and that's certainly happened. Do you think that's helping? Do we need more of that?
I have no doubt. Yes, it is happening, and we need more of it. And I think especially for the larger, more reputable vendors. I mean, this is one way in which they're held accountable.
Right.
And there are costs to society that we are incurring as a society as a result of the devices being the way they are in some cases. And I mean, I can't speak to exactly who was negligent, but there have been some instances of that, vulnerabilities that are well known, well understood, well publicized, that the vendor has decided, tough luck, we're just going to leave the device exactly the way it is. And we as consumers can certainly agitate for better practices, but the government represents us, and that's part of their job. So
there's a lot of parallels there, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And when you buy a vehicle, the manufacturer will recall it to fix things. Largely, that doesn't happen in many of the scenarios. If a vulnerable router gets out there, D-Link or whoever the vendor is, isn't recalling it to fix it, right?
Yeah. And you really think about it, gets really interesting because the vehicle pretty soon is just a collection of IoT devices.
Yeah, exactly.
On a little network inside with some hardware around it.
Right.
But we're gonna see. Just in the auto industry, it's gonna be interesting to see how they respond. And you and I are seeing that right now.
Right.
Their responses. DEF CON is gonna have a lot of focus on the auto security in automobiles. But we still have some ways to go.
I think regulation's going to help. Whether it truly solves the problem, I think will remain to be seen. But I think it can help push the needle in the right direction.
I do think it's one leg of that stool that needs to happen, and plenty of other work has to happen, including from people in the industry, on just thinking this through and building better IoT devices and computing systems.
Now, you have a couple of resources for our listeners. These will be in the show notes as well for this interview. But you've got the threat report, and you've got another free service as well.
Yes, absolutely. So we published this report yesterday, maybe it was the day before, and is available, for free. I do want to emphasize, we don't capture your creds. You don't have to give your creds or anything to have access to this document. So please go to the website, download it.
There's no registration.
No registration.
Okay.
No registration required.
Beautiful.
You can register to keep in touch with us.
Right.
But
You don't have to.
we've decided that we're going to leave the report out there for people to consume.
And that's netscout.com/threat report.
That's it. And then so we publish these every 6 months. You know, it kind of a collection based on our collections and deeper analysis of what we're seeing. But what we've done is launched a situational awareness platform. That's how we think of it, that we're calling Cyber Threat Horizon. That's more a real-time view of our collections. So here's attacks happening right now. Yeah, there are pew-pew maps in there, but they're, with a lot of capability to let you go, okay, what's happening to myself, like people like myself, or people that I care about. And so you could be like, hey, I care about manufacturing in Southeast Asia, and then you go like, okay, here's the attacks that are happening there, and also like couple that with summary reports and other ways in which we represent what we're seeing in the landscape. And I do want to point out, like we have worldwide visibility into attacks. We talk about.
You talked about India and Pakistan, right, being in the report, and some intelligence coming from the cyber attacks that are happening.
But I mean, and in the DDoS, like just in DDoS, say we can report on 4 million DDoS attacks just from the first 6 months of the year.
Wow.
So that's kind of the breadth which we see events across the internet, and that's now represented in Cyber Threat Horizon. So that's at horizon.netscout.com. We're basically announcing it this week. And
Sweet.
Yeah, it's a free resource. Have at it.
Awesome. Hardik, thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.